everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sam and my channel is called Special Needs Survivalist. This is a video that I need to do and I know that it's going to be kind of long, so I just want to apologize in advance, but I feel like before I do some of the other videos that I'm looking to do, I actually need to do this first. Start from the beginning, so to speak. Before I get into it, let me just ask you, if you like what you see, please hit the subscribe button, push the like button, and also turn on your notifications because then you'll know every time I post a video. I'm trying to post a video Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays at 10 a.m. I had originally started this on the week of my oldest daughter's birthday. I actually started it on her birthday, and that was a really rough week for me. That was last week. This past week was a little rough as well. So I'm trying to get a bunch of videos filmed so that I can have content for you. Anyway, so I'm gonna try my best, and I apologize for those of you who have been watching that haven't seen any videos because I haven't posted any. It's just been a rough time. April to July is always hard because of Amelia. So anyway, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video that I did put out of Amelia's, some of the memories that we have with her, because those were really sweet memories. At any rate, let's get into it. So in order for you to understand Nora's story, you first have to understand Amelia's story. Amelia was our oldest daughter who died 5 years ago, almost. And when she was born, we had no idea that she had SMA. We had no idea that we were both carriers for SMA. So there was just this, I don't know how to explain it. So there was this awareness that she wasn't typical, but we didn't know why. And we were really hoping that SMA wasn't it, because at the time, SMA was a death sentence, especially the type that Amelia suffered from, which is type 1. Actually, we believe she was more of a type 0. So type 0 is basically the baby is born with SMA signs already, and they usually don't live past 6 months without treatment. So because Amelia progressed as fast as she did, she was considered more of a type 0. For all intents and purposes at the time, Nora was considered type 1. And I'll get into the types a little bit more in depth, but essentially the earlier that the symptoms present, the more severe the disease. So type 0 is the most severe and it's fatal early. Type 1 is the second most severe, although most people aren't even aware of type 0 because a lot of people don't think it exists, but it very much does. Type 1 is considered the #1 genetic killer of infants, or at least it was at the time that Amelia was alive. So SMA, what is SMA? It's spinal muscular atrophy. It is a progressive neuromuscular genetic disease that causes muscle weakness as a result of the death of motor neurons. So what happens in SMA is that they have no copies of what is called survival motor neuron 1. What survival motor neuron 1 does, it's a gene, and it prevents the muscles from deteriorating because it prevents the motor neurons from dying. So in SMA, the person has a deleted gene, so they don't have SMN1. The backup copies are called SMN2, and people with SMA have limited numbers of the backup copy of the gene that they're missing. So a lot of the theory is that the more SMN2 you have, the more copies you have, the less severe of the disease. That's not always the case, and we're still learning about what exactly classifies a person as type 0, type 1, etc. A lot of times it is considered by like what their motor status is. So type 1s couldn't sit up. Type 0s couldn't hold up their head. Type 2s can't walk. That's generally how things are classified, or at least they were. Now that treatments are available, it's changed a great deal. So what would have been considered a type 1 is probably less severe now because of treatment. All of the treatments for SMA do not cure the disease. They only can slow the progression. Sometimes you will see gains, but not always. And a lot of the emphasis used to be on, okay, this kid needs to get better. That doesn't necessarily happen. Anyway, so because we didn't know Amelia had the disease, we weren't able to get her help very quickly. So by the time we actually got the diagnosis, she was very sick, and she was only a little over a month out from her death. So we're not really sure if she would have gotten treatment, how much it would have helped. But we learned from it. So after Amelia died, we were told that we were probably carriers for SMA. So SMA is considered an autosomal recessive condition, meaning that if two carriers have a child, they have a 25% chance of having a child with the disease, a 50% chance of having an unaffected carrier, meaning that they could pass the disease on to their child, but they do not themselves have it. Then the other 25% is neither affected nor a carrier. Knowing these odds, with every subsequent pregnancy, we have done an amniocentesis, which has given us the information as to whether or not baby has SMA. The advantages to knowing ahead of time is that the sooner that you know, the sooner you can treat. The sooner you treat, the less severe the progression can be. So with Lydia, we had the testing done. We knew she didn't have the disease. So when it came time for Nora, I just felt like I knew that she had SMA very early on in my pregnancy. So I just had this feeling that she had it. So we did the amniocentesis. I can't remember exactly at what point. It was before 20 weeks. I want to say it was like 15 to 17 weeks. And it takes a few weeks to get the results back. And I was at work. I was working at the nursing home at the time, and I got the call from the genetic counselor, and genetic counselors kind of help with like family planning and explaining to you, okay, these are your risks of having a child with these conditions. I should backtrack and let you know that we did find out that we were both carriers for SMA, which was important to know because then we could test for future pregnancies. Anyway, we got the amniocentesis results back, and I got the call at work. Justin was at work also, and the genetic counselor, when she called, said, "Can you talk?" Usually when the news is good, it's, "Oh, hey, I just wanted to let you know all the test results came back fine." Obviously, that wasn't the case here. And so I quickly excused myself, and basically she said, "I'm so sorry, but the baby has SMA." And it was, yeah, she's definitely a girl, but she has SMA. And I will give you some time to process the news. Obviously, even though I was expecting the news, it was really hard to hear. So I had them page Justin at work, and he was dealing with an emergency at the time, and it was something kind of weird and silly, but also it was technically an emergency, but he said, "Well, I'm dealing with an emergency," and they said, "Well, your wife has a bigger emergency." So we went into a room, I talked to him, I told him baby has SMA. So eventually we did an analysis to figure out how many copies of SMN2 Nora had. We found out that she had 2. So they loosely consider her type 1, which makes sense because at the time when Amelia was diagnosed, she was considered type 1. So knowing this, we made a plan for her birth. We planned that she would start Spinraza, which was the only FDA-approved drug at the time. That was a lumbar puncture. It's still available. It was the very first treatment. It was actually FDA-approved the same year that Amelia died. But anyway, we decided we were going to start her on Spinraza as soon as we possibly could. They had to get all of our insurance information and all that stuff. And we were hoping within the first couple of weeks of delivery that we would be able to dose Nora with the Spinraza. So throughout the pregnancy, we decided, okay, we're going to have baby go to the NICU just to make sure that she doesn't have any issues there, since we knew that Amelia was in trouble right away. We just felt better delivering in a place that had a NICU. And the big question was, okay, I've already had 2 babies. I've had one child 3 weeks early, and then I had another that I had a lot of preterm contractions with. So it was like this big question mark of when are we going to have the baby? But I kept going to the doctor. Every time I went to the doctor, they did an ultrasound to make sure that everything was looking good with the baby, and she was looking great. and everything was kind of going according to plan. We had a fetal care team that kind of coordinated everything with us and said, okay, this is the plan going forward. This is how we're going to plan for the birth and the treatment and all that stuff. We met with the neurologist, we met with palliative care, we met with the neonatal team. So we were very much prepared. The funny thing about Nora is that we can make all these preparations and she still likes to surprise us. And that's exactly what happened. She started that from the beginning. So I drove myself to my 37-week appointment, and towards the end of a pregnancy, usually at 36 weeks, they want to see you weekly. So I drove myself. Justin was working, and I had no idea that I was driving myself to my baby's birth at the time. I had everything packed just in case they decided, hey, you need to stay because the baby's coming soon. So they did the ultrasound, and there was nothing. It was just routine at first, and then all of a sudden I noticed that the ultrasound technician was zeroing in on her heart pretty frequently, and I was just like looking at that, and third baby, so I'd seen ultrasounds before, and I was like, something's not right here. And we'd noticed that the baby's heart rate was very slow and that it just didn't seem normal. So they said, you know what, let's call the doctor. The doctor said, let's get you hooked up to a monitor. So every time I would have a contraction, and I had contractions starting at like 20 weeks, I start contracting very early. I just have a very irritable uterus. So every time I would have a contraction, they weren't even real labor contractions, the baby's heart rate would drop. So they called the doctor, and they're like, this is just really weird. Let's have you listen. And we listened literally to the arrhythmia in her heart, and we were just like, what is this? I don't know what's going on. This didn't come up in any of the other ultrasounds. We've checked the baby's heart before. Okay, something's not right. Let's get you upstairs. We're probably going to have to induce you. So I called Justin, and I'm like, well, okay, something's going on with the baby's heart. We're not sure what's going on. We're probably going to have to induce. You should probably start getting ready to come over here. So, then I called my dad, and my dad was living in the town at the time, and I said, something's going on with the baby's heart. We're not sure what's up. I'm just going to go upstairs. I'm going to get checked out. They're probably going to induce me. And he's like, well, can I come over? I'm like, well, no, I don't really want you there when I'm in labor. So I just said, I'll let you know. They brought me upstairs. They got everything going really fast. They got an IV in me right away. They got me in a bed. I changed into my gown, everything, and the doctor came upstairs, put the ultrasound on, and said, okay, we're going to do a C-section. And this all happened very fast. I mean, from the time that they decided something was wrong to the time that she was born, it was maybe an hour or two. It was not very long at all. So Justin did not make it for the birth. It was an emergency C-section. I was scared. I didn't know if the baby was going to be alive or dead. I didn't know what was wrong with her heart. I had no idea. I just knew this baby was already sick. What was going on? And they said, okay, well, do you want somebody to take pictures for you? So I gave them my phone. They took pictures for me during the birth. And our palliative care nurse, who has dealt with everything with us, with Amelia, she walked with us through that. They called her and said, hey, can you come? The baby's coming. Sam doesn't have anybody. So she was right at my head and explained to me what was going on and everything. So Nora was born. She had a good cry. She seemed perfectly normal, but they did put her in the NICU because of the arrhythmia, and they had her hooked up to an EKG, which kind of measured the electrical activity in her heart. And they noticed that she did have the arrhythmia. So then they did what is called an echocardiogram. And when they did that, they found out that she had a hole in her, multiple holes in her heart. So with the atria, there's the upper two chambers of the heart are called the atria, or the atrium, the left atrium, right atrium. Then the two lower chambers are the left ventricle and the right ventricle. So she had, there's septums that separate the two atria and the two ventricles. So she had a hole in the septum of her ventricles, and then she also had multiple holes in her septum of her atria. So she actually had two separate heart defects that we didn't know about. But they said, you know, we fully expect these to resolve themselves. Everything looks good. We'll just keep an eye on her. She'll see cardio at 6 months old. So that really wasn't a big deal, but at the time it was really scary. So then she started, they started out and they said, you know, she's eating well, she's breathing okay, she seems motor-wise, she seems fairly typical, this is great. I stayed in the hospital for almost a week and so did she. They did a car seat test, she was good. They did send her home with what was called an apnea monitor, and what apnea is an absence of breathing. So a lot of children with SMA have weak respiratory muscles, and so they might stop breathing. And so they sent us home on this apnea monitor and said, okay, if this goes off, you need to call. That apnea monitor was the bane of my existence, but here's the thing, it actually has saved her. And so it went off a number of times throughout the first few weeks of her life. We went back to the NICU once, and then she went to the regular floor of the Children's Hospital once, and then she went to the PICU. The first time it was just, okay, it seems like she has what's called periodic breathing, which is just, it's not actual apnea, but it's pauses. And it's very common in premature babies. So what they treat it with is caffeine. So they started her on caffeine and she did really well with that. And then she ended up with a cold, and the cold caused her to have some respiratory issues. So she went back to the hospital. I had asked for a suction machine because I knew that it seemed like she was getting weak pretty quickly. We started her on nebulizers after her second hospital stay just to get her used to them. So she was on nebulizers within the first month that she was born. And then she had her second dose of Spinraza. So she started Spinraza. The second hospital stay, when she was 10 days old, they started the Spinraza. So with Spinraza, they have loading doses. So they do 4 doses, 2 weeks apart. And then, 2 weeks between the first 2, and then another 2 weeks, and then a month or something like that. Anyway, there's loading doses to get the medication into your system. So by the time she had her second dose, her cry was weak. She was starting to have weak muscles. Her respiratory issues were getting really difficult to manage. Her secretions were an issue. So after she had her Spinraza, she was given some what's called Versed, and it kind of calms you down so that she wasn't, upset by the fact that she was getting a needle poked into her spine. That's how they give Spinraza. So anyway, after that, she saw the pulmonologist, and the pulmonologist noticed right away that Nora had changed very quickly. That she was having trouble breathing, that her muscles were significantly weaker, and she said, okay, this baby needs help. So she came in, talked to us for a minute, and said, hey, hold tight, I'll be right back. And we just sat there. And she came back in and she said, okay, here's the thing. I've noticed that Nora she's not doing well. And I want to know how aggressive you want to be with her treatment. And she was not even, I want to say she was about a month old, not even. She was just under a month old. Yep, it was September 24th, and she was born August 28th. So she wasn't even a month old, and we're having this conversation about how aggressive do you want to be with her treatment, and we're like, well, right now, let's do everything, because we don't know what this treatment's going to do for her. And so she said, I think we need to take Nora to the pediatric intensive care unit to start her on BiPAP, which is, non-invasive ventilatory support. So it helps expand the lungs. So she said, let's start her on the BiPAP. Let's see what we can do. But I think she's going to need a feeding tube. We really need to talk about a tracheostomy. And this is going to be a long haul. So all of this just happened really fast. And Nora was getting sicker very quickly. She wasn't gaining weight. She wasn't breathing well. And so Justin went back home to get some stuff for Nora and I to stay at the hospital. And we did not know how long she was going to be there for. So we stayed, and they said, if we want to do the surgeries, she has to gain weight. She has to get to 6 kilograms so that we can, 4 kilograms. Sorry, not 6. 4 kilograms, which is about 8-ish pounds to do the surgeries that we want to do for her. And so we need her to gain weight. And so basically the first few weeks of the hospital stay was waiting for her to gain the weight that she needed to gain. In the process of the hospitalization, she'd had a swallow study before, not this hospitalization that we're talking about currently, but the one before that. And they said, you know, she's swallowing okay. 10 days later, during the same hospital stay, we noticed that, okay, she's having trouble breathing when she's eating. We're wondering if she might be aspirating. Aspiration is when instead of your food going to your stomach, it goes to your lungs, which is very dangerous and can cause pneumonia. So we're fairly certain that was what was going on, especially since we had dealt with it with Amelia. So they did a swallow study, and she aspirated on thin liquids, which is just like your regular milk. They did thicken her bottles to a thicker consistency and said, you know, she's doing better with that, so let's try thickened formula. The problem with the thickened formula is it took more work for her to get the formula out of the bottle, which made her tire a lot easier. So she was getting very fatigued with eating. So she really wasn't gaining weight because she was using her energy to either eat or breathe. So we decided to put what is called a nasogastric tube, which is a tube that goes into the nose, down the throat, and into the stomach to give feedings. So what we would do is we'd give her a little time to try to eat with the bottle, and then once she would be tired enough, we would just give the rest of the volume in the tube, and that made it a lot easier for her to gain weight. So then the next thing was, okay, we know she needs a feeding tube. Justin and I were mostly okay with that, but we knew that the tracheostomy was going to be a big challenge. And we weren't sure what we wanted to do about that, but we were told that BiPAP wasn't going to be an option for home, so we probably really needed to do the tracheostomy. So at the time, I was largely of the opinion, okay, yeah, we need to do the trach, we can do this, it's going to be hard, but I think we can manage it. But I was not going to make a unilateral decision without Justin, and he was not able to be here for most of this hospital stay because he had to work. And we also had Lydia at home who needed the attention. So eventually I said, okay, we need to have a care conference, and we need to get all of our questions answered and decide whether or not we want to go forward with the tracheostomy and the G-tube. So our options were we could just do the G-tube and see how she does with the BiPAP and then wait to see if she needed the trach. The other option was we could just continue the NG tube, which really didn't seem like a good option for us. And then the last option was to just do both procedures in that surgery at the same time, give her one recovery time. So once we got all of our questions answered, we decided that the tracheostomy was the best decision, along with the G-tube, just do it all. We knew it was going to be a lot, and then she ended up getting her 3rd dose of Spinraza. They also noticed that she had a tongue tie. So in the process of doing the surgery for the tracheostomy, the G-tube, and then they did what's called a Nissen fundoplication, and what that does is it prevents, it kind of closes the sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach, so that food doesn't come back up. So they did the G-tube, the Nissen, the tracheostomy, the tongue tie release, and then they did the Spinraza, and then they also did a PICC line. So PICC line is an IV that's more permanent. It goes directly to the heart, and what it does is gives medication. So she needed sedation after her trach surgery because any sort of movement after a fresh tracheostomy could be very dangerous, and you don't want to dislodge that trach and lose the airway. So they had to make sure that they gave her a PICC line so that they could continue to keep her sedated until the trach was changed, which is about a week out. And then also for pain medication and just overall hydration and everything. So she had the surgeries on October 8th, 2018. She was just about 6 weeks old at the time. They were not having a very easy time getting the breathing tube in, so that took a long time, but once they did all the surgeries, they went very well. Recovery was really rough, especially the first day. She was really puffy. It was clear she'd been through a lot in the surgeries, but she did as well as they could expect. She had some trouble with getting the fluid out of her body, so we had to manage that, but then after the trach change, we could start waking her up. There were a few hiccups where she was requiring some sedation. She was having some issues with some irritability, but once that all settled, it was like she couldn't cry and we couldn't hear her talk because of the trach, so she couldn't force the air over. It's like right above under the vocal cords. So that was a little rough, not being able to hear her cry, but she gained a little bit of mobility because she wasn't working so hard to breathe. And the feeding tube was just a huge blessing. It helped her grow even more. So once we got all that stuff situated, we also were in the process of moving. We couldn't keep her in the house that we had in the other town that we lived in. So before we got Nora discharged, we decided we needed to move first so that we could have all of her stuff ready to go. She obviously needed the ventilator, she needed the feeding tube supplies, and of course this big room that I will explain to you in some other video, with all of her stuff needed to be set up. And obviously that has evolved over the last 2.5 years since we've learned more about Nora and what works for her and what we need to keep on hand. But at any rate, she was on Spinraza for 2 years, and then she eventually switched to the medication that now she's on. Is called Evrysdi, which is also called Risdiplam. It is a oral medication, or it could also be given via feeding tube, which is how she takes it. And it's just a daily thing. She doesn't need to be in the hospital. She doesn't need to have any of the lumbar punctures anymore, which is awesome. And over time, she's grown in so many ways. She still needs the vent most of the time. She still doesn't eat by mouth. We've had a number of close calls with her, but we also haven't been in the hospital for a year, which is awesome. And it has allowed us to give Nora a life that we couldn't give Amelia. And there's a lot of wonderful things in that, but it also adds an extra layer of crazy to our lives. But it is so much better than not having her here. So we're just continuing to learn more and more about Nora. So overall, we manage life. Nora is a happy girl. She doesn't get to go very many places because of COVID, and during cold and flu season, it's still very much the case even without COVID. But in the spring and summer, we can enjoy life a little bit more. But yeah, I just felt like I needed to kind of give you the story of Nora and kind of how we got to where we're at today. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't too long for you. I understand that this is kind of a whirlwind, but I feel like in order to understand Nora's needs, you also need to understand how we got to where we are. So that's why I did this video. Again, if you are really enjoying my content, please subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you'll know when I post. I'm working on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays at 10 a.m. for my postings, but I will see you in the next video. Bye!